Hello everyone, welcome back to Benton Homestead. As I'm sure you know, we have now settled in Japan, but today I want to take a look back to our time as full-time house sitters in Mexico. As the world continues to become more and more interconnected, and the number of digital nomads continues to rise, the concept of traveling and house sitting while working and seeing the world becomes more and more feasible and obtainable for many. I know for myself personally, our experience house sitting has completely transformed the way I will look at traveling in the future. For example, based on our experience house sitting, anytime we plan to take a trip somewhere, I will absolutely be checking various avenues before making any reservations to see if there are house sitting opportunities, the dates and locations that we would like to be. And I can say with certainty that I would not be as optimistic of the possibilities if I hadn't experienced this for myself. Once we put ourselves out there as house sitters and available, we started booking house sits back to back to back. In fact, there were so many house sitting opportunities available that we were able to pick and choose the house sits that worked best for us. We were able to consider the duration of the trip, the location of the house, the number of and kind of pets, the workload, that sort of thing, and determine if it fit in with our house sitting schedule and what we were looking for. And I will admit that we were willing to accept some much bigger workload house sits than some people might consider. For example, we were happy to have house sits with chickens and big gardens to take care of, and we also did a house sit with many, many animals, as I'll get into. Not everyone is looking for that kind of house sit, but we weren't going into it looking for a vacation. We were looking for the best way for us to explore Mexico and see a variety of places. That being said, let's get right into it. Here we are on the Benton Homestead photo blog, and you'll see my latest post here, Mexico Data, House Sitting and Travel by the Numbers. So as I've done in some previous videos, I'm just going to read through this blog and add a little bit of commentary as we go. So if you prefer to read your content, you're welcome to just hop over to the blog and read this for yourself. But if you prefer to listen to your content, please stick with me and we'll read through it together. From the moment we pulled up our roots, packed up our car, and expatriated ourselves from the United States in 2021, we've been exploring small towns, big cities, and whole countries previously unknown to us. I've said before that I think we've approached our fledgling immigrant experience in both Mexico and now in Japan with gentleness, openness, and genuine curiosity. This sense of adventure, coupled with the warm welcome from all the lovely people we've met along the way, encouraged us to keep navigating new destinations and seeking out new cultural experiences. We left Mexico for Japan nearly 1 year ago, and I've had this little blog saved as a draft ever since. I guess it's better late than never to post it and share it with you. I really enjoy breaking things down into data, so let's take a look at the numbers from our time in Mexico. Please note that I've written dozens of blogs about Mexico on our own Benton Homestead travel journal, as well as on my Danny Benton photography photo blog. The links you'll see below will take you directly to the blogs on that particular topic. So as you're scrolling the blog, anytime you see the blue hyperlink, feel free to click on that and it'll expand to the full blog. This first section takes a look at time and distance on the road. We crossed the border into Mexico on December 5th, 2021, and we crossed back over to the US on February 5th, 2023. Don't ask me how it worked out so perfectly. We definitely didn't plan it that way. So we were in Mexico for 14 months, or 427 days. We drove a total of 9,350 miles throughout Mexico. I wanted to be able to put that into perspective a little bit, so I did some math, and that's like driving all the way from California to Georgia, back to California, back to Georgia, and then almost all the way back to California. So We definitely put a lot of miles on the car in Mexico. Because of all the miles driven, we wanted to make sure that our car stayed nice and reliable. So while we were there, we had 2 oil changes, and thankfully we only had 1 flat tire. If you're interested in hearing that story, you can click on the link to read the blog or watch that YouTube video. And a fun little side quest that we had was the most number of oceans seen in one day is 2. We started that day on the Pacific Ocean, and by that evening, we were looking at the Gulf of Mexico. Now, when talking about Mexico, it seems like the first thing that always comes up is safety. And to put it nicely, I'm going to say that most people who bring up safety haven't actually traveled Mexico, but that aside, we did make sure that we were prepared for the worst at any time, as we always are, regardless of what country we're in. We choose to be safe, as safe as possible. I also did a full blog and YouTube video about how we physically traveled Mexico, what we brought in our car, and all of that, so I won't go into that here. The number of times we were pulled over by Mexico's National Guard at a standard traffic checkpoint is 4. And again, these are standard checkpoints. They are often set up at state border crossings within Mexico or various other locations, and they just sometimes pull you over to check that all your paperwork is in order and that you're in the country legally. The number of times we were pulled over by Mexican policia is 2. And funny story, one time we were pulled over because I came out of our Airbnb and went the wrong way on a one-way street. Immediately, I saw the flashing lights behind me, and of course we feared the worst. But the friendly police officer just asked us where we were going, notified us that it was a one-way and let's not do that again, please. And then he gave us directions. In contrast, the other time we were pulled over by a police officer, we did get him to try to solicit an illegal cash bribe. And this turns out is in a location just north of Puerto Vallarta that is known for having motorcycle police officers try to solicit cash bribes. So fortunately, we did not lose very many pesos, but it did happen. The total number of stolen license plates was only 1. The worst state for license plate replacement was Louisiana, and the best state for license plate replacement is South Dakota. I also did a full blog and YouTube video on our license plate replacement. So whether or not you're from South Dakota, if you're interested in driving in Mexico and you're a US citizen, you might want to check that out before driving south across the border. Now, here's where I'm going to start getting in trouble with some pronunciation, so please forgive me. I'm going to do my best. Mexico's full name is Estados Unidos Mexicanos. Of the 32 states that make up the Federation of Mexico, we had the pleasure of visiting 21. Tamaulipas, Nuevo León, Coahuila, Coahuila, San Luis Potosí, Guanajuato, Querétaro, Hidalgo, State of Mexico, Mexico City, which is its own state-like district, Michoacán, Jalisco, Nayarit, Sinaloa, Durango, Zacatecas, Tlaxcala, Puebla, Morelos, Oaxaca, Veracruz, and Tabasco. Now, clearly, we spent more time in some states than others, so let's break this down further. Out of the 21 Mexican states that we visited, there were 5 states that we only drove through and did not stay overnight. So we visited these trips on long driving days as we were going from one place to another. For example, we crossed into Mexico into the state of Tamaulipas because we crossed at Reynosa. There were 7 states that we stayed up to a week. So some of these states we drove through once, and then on a later circle around Mexico, we stayed 1 to 6 nights. Now, I obviously don't consider myself super familiar with those states because we didn't stay in them very long, but now we'll get into the states that we're more familiar with. These are the states that we stayed 1 to 6 weeks. There were 6 of them. The state of Mexico, Mexico City, Nayarit, Sinaloa. Now, all of those were for house sits, but we also stayed a good amount of time in Puebla multiple times. It was a convenient place to stop when traveling back and forth. And Puebla, Cholula, Puebla, is actually one of my favorite cities in Mexico. And also Veracruz. We stayed 10 days in Coatzacoalcos. Lastly, there are 3 states that we stayed between 2 and 3 months. Obviously, these are the states in Mexico that most felt like home. In Jalisco, we stayed 1 night in Guadalajara, 10 weeks in Puerto Vallarta, and 2 trips to visit our friends in Yalapa. In Guanajuato, we stayed 10 days in Guanajuato City. That was one of our first house sits. We stayed 5 weeks in León and 4 weeks in San Miguel de Allende. And in Oaxaca, we stayed a total of 18 weeks in San Andres Guayapam, which is a small village just outside of Oaxaca City. We stayed 1 week in Oaxaca City and 1 night in Salina Cruz, which is down on the coast. Now, if you're not familiar, there's a long list of cities, towns, and villages sprinkled throughout Mexico known as magic cities. These are officially designated by a program within Mexico to celebrate certain municipalities known for being particularly vibrant, unique, or culturally important, to promote tourism for both Mexicans and foreigners alike. Now, when you're talking about particularly vibrant and Mexico, these towns are really something special. Of the 132 magic cities, we had the pleasure of visiting a dozen. While I was initially skeptical that these places could be differentiated from all of the wonderful, unique, vastly different places that we had seen otherwise, it's true that each one of the dozen that we visited were quite special. And I don't need to read through the list, but you can read it for yourself on the blog and click on the link for any more information. Now, jumping right into house sitting statistics, you can see on this list that we had 10 house sits spanning a total of 10 months. The first one was a work exchange in Aculco. That one had chickens, a dog, and a cat. And the reason that I specify that that was a work exchange instead of a house sit is that we stayed on that ranch for 2 weeks in exchange for completely revamping their chicken yard and coming up with some ideas and conversations with them about how to improve their ranch in the future. The second house sit was in Guanajuato with just chickens and a big garden for 10 days. Our third house sit was in Oaxaca with 2 dogs for 6 weeks. The fourth house sit was just across on the other side of the village in Oaxaca with a total of 8 dogs and 3 cats for 4 weeks. That one was particularly memorable. Our fifth house sit took us right to the beach of La Cruz de Guanacaxtle with 1 dog for 3 weeks. House sit number 6 was in the city of León with 1 dog and 1 cat for 5 weeks. House sit number 7 and 8 took us right back down to Oaxaca to the same previous 2 sits in Oaxaca. We visited both of them again, one with 2 dogs for 7 weeks, and this time we had 5 dogs and 4 cats for 5 days. House sit number 9 took us right to the heart of Mexico City during Christmas time with 2 cats for 3 weeks. And our last house sit in Mexico took us to beautiful San Miguel de Allende with 1 dog and 1 cat for 4 weeks. You can see that each one of those house sits are a hyperlink to a full photo blog and YouTube video if you're interested in seeing what the houses, the pets, the experience, and the responsibilities were for each individual sit. We spent a total of 283 days caring for other people's pets in their homes while they were away. The shortest house sit was 5 days, and the longest house sit was 7 weeks. Now, I mentioned earlier that we were able to be a little picky about which house sits we decided to accept, and the only reason that we accepted the one for 5 days is because it was for a host who had invited us back, and it worked out absolutely perfectly with our travel plans. So otherwise, we wouldn't have accepted one that was so short unless something worked out just nice and neat like that. So if you do the math, that means the average house sit length was 25 days. Our 10 house sits spanning 10 months took us to 5 Mexican states and 7 beautiful cities. So if you're familiar with those cities, you can see that we had a great mix of beach life, mountains, tiny village, and big city. I couldn't have asked for a better Mexican experience. I do get asked about who our hosts were for these house sits, so I have a little bit of data about them without giving away any personal information. Of our 10 house sits, we had 13 hosts, and that's because some of them were couples. Of those 13 hosts, 30% of them were Mexican, that would be 4 hosts, and 9 hosts, or 70%, were foreign or non-Mexican. So we had 4 Canadians, 4 Americans, and 1 European. Of course, the big question everybody asks is, how did you actually book the house sits? And I have to say, it was a heck of a lot easier than I thought it would be. I started out just by joining a Facebook group called House and Pet Sitting in Mexico. I put a little introductory post about ourselves with a photo of ourselves, a little bit of our story, why we were in Mexico, generally where we wanted to travel, and that we were looking for house sits that were about a month or longer, but that we were flexible on many things. And based on that post, we got a great response. I interacted with a few people, we messaged back and forth, we did some video calls, and sure enough, even though we did not have any previous house sitting experience, people were scheduling us and welcoming us into their homes. Once I realized that this was actually something that we could do long term, I decided to join a website called housesitmexico.com. And it was approximately $100 a year to join and make a profile. And that was also beneficial. It definitely paid for itself. I have to note that I did look into numerous other house sitting websites, and there are many other popular websites that seem to be more popular for specific other countries. So housesitmexico.com had by far the most house sits available in Mexico. I chose initially to only sign up with the one website to see if it was worth it, and I ended up having our entire time that we needed booked between the Facebook and the housesitmexico.com, so I never ended up having to sign up for any of those other websites like trustedhousesitters.com. Now, if I were to go into house sitting here in Japan or some other countries, I would probably end up signing up with Trusted House Sitters that I just mentioned, because that one seems to be far more popular globally. So to reiterate, I booked 2 sits through the House Sit Mexico website, and I booked 5 sits through the free Facebook group House and Pet Sitting in Mexico. I also booked 1 sit via just a host recommendation, and 2 of our sits were repeat hosts, meaning they invited us back for another house sit period. Now, the host recommendation and the repeat sits were also originally found through the Facebook group, so I guess you could say 8 of our sits were via the free Facebook group, and 2 sits were via the House Sit Mexico website. Now, how could I make a video about house sitting without actually talking about the pets? So the total number of pets that we watched was 37. That breaks down to 14 dogs, 8 cats, and 15 chickens. In addition to that, some of our hosts also fed street dogs, so we had a total of 6 additional street dogs that we were asked to feed while they were away. Of course, when you're talking about animals, house sitting, and pet sitting, the most important thing is to make sure that the pets are comfortable in their own homes while their owners are away. So that means sticking to their schedule, doing the things they're familiar with, and especially not changing their food. We had a total of 3 pets who were on a special raw food diet, and almost all of the pets had a regular feeding schedule that we would then conform our day to meeting what the pet was used to. And we found ourselves at the veterinary clinic a total of 5 times. Once was for an elderly Chihuahua. She was having trouble going to the bathroom shortly prior to our arrival. The host had taken her to the vet and she was on some medication, and a few days after they left, we took her to the vet again, and then it cleared up right after that. We also went to the vet 2 times for a special little dog who is known for occasionally refusing to eat her food. But the vet was very familiar with her and the situation, and we were able to also get through that without any problems. If you haven't figured out by this point, I should specify that house sitting and pet sitting shouldn't be considered a vacation because really the animals are the most important thing, and if you have to drop everything and take them to the vet, you have to be able to do that. Which brings me to another special dog named Lucky. We went to the vet 2 times for this elderly former street dog who was undergoing cancer treatment. Of course, the majority of the time that you're caring for people's pets, it's fun, but there can also be heartbreak like this. Shortly before our house sit with Lucky began, he was diagnosed with a fast-spreading cancer. Now, he had previously been rescued from near death by his people after having mange and other health issues. They found him as a street dog and nursed him back to health. They literally gave Lucky a second chance at life and gave him many more years than he would have had otherwise. During our 5 weeks with Lucky, his cancer progressed at an alarming rate, so we were in very close contact, daily contact with our hosts and the vet. Of course, we knew Lucky would not have very long after our host returned, and they were very aware of that as well. So we did our best to give him extra walks, extra treats. Lucky got chicken every day and extra attention. He was able to spend a few more months with his people after they returned, and we know they savored every extra day they had with this sweet old guy. Eventually, they did let us know when Lucky had passed and thanked us again for spending those 5 weeks with him. I only mention it just because house and pet sitting is not all fun and games. It's mostly fun, it's mostly great, but you do have to be prepared for the worst as well. And we will always remember Lucky. Even though it was only 5 weeks, he was a real sweet dog. Just to end on a fun note, I came up with these cute house sit pet awards. The best alarm clock goes to Wamba. Most unique look goes to Momo. When we were walking Momo one time through the village, a man stopped and said, "Unico perro," which means unique dog. The most toys fetched goes to Beanie. The fluffiest kitty is Giacomo. The fluffiest doggo is Pelu. The most chill award goes to Gomita. The most compliments from strangers definitely goes to Bella. Everyone loved her little sweater. The best prancing award goes to Florinda, who pranced all the way up into the mountains on our daily walk. The World Traveler Award goes to Milo, who has gone from Mexico to Europe. The best cross eyes goes to Zoe. The best side eye goes to this chicken. And the most improved award goes to Felix, who I think was one of the only pets experiencing pet sitters for the first time. You can imagine that having your people leave and these strange people come in their place would be a bit jarring the first time. So it took a little while for Felix to get used to it, but by the end of the trip, he was fantastic. So if it's not obvious, I had a lot of fun putting this blog together for y'all. I think the most important thing about having this YouTube channel and sharing this information is that we do have fun from time to time. So I know a lot of you are waiting on some immigration videos for both Mexico and Japan, and I promise I'll be getting to those soon. I just really wanted to make this video now as we're coming up on 1 year since we left Mexico, which means we're also almost at 1 year in Japan. I'd like to end by saying that I can't express enough thanks to every single one of our house sit hosts for trusting us to care for their beloved pets and homes. It's such an honor and such a huge responsibility. Sometimes when I think about it, I can't believe that these people not only trust us to come into their homes while they're away, but they trust us with their pets, and that's a big responsibility. Our 10 months as full-time house sitters throughout Mexico during our 14 months living in Mexico was an experience we'll always appreciate and never forget. We continue to hope that we're able to maintain a connection bridging Mexico and Japan in the future. We will be returning to Mexico in 2025 to turn our temporary residency into permanent residency. And who knows, we're leaving our options open. Even though we are settled and living here in Japan, we may still have some time to have some house sitting adventures while we're back in Mexico. In the meantime, we need to plant a whole greenhouse just for Mexican food ingredients, because you sure can't find them here. And as always, thanks to you for watching these videos. We're staying very busy here in Japan. As you know, we're working every day to get our business off the ground. We have a second abandoned house that we're renovating, and we have 5 fields of abandoned farmland that we need to get ready and producing vegetables and honey as soon as possible. So we're working every day towards that, but we also really want to focus on this YouTube channel to make it better and more of a community hub to answer questions about living, farming, and visas in Japan. So thanks for watching. Please let us know at any time. You're welcome to reach out if you have questions, comments, or any specific topics that you'd like to see covered in the future.